This is Nicole Ackley, Wicomico County Council member, and you're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, the best source of news on Maryland policy and politics.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Canale here and filling in for Michael Sanderson, Brianna January. Brianna January joined MACO last August, so just about a month ago, and covers a diverse portfolio as MACO's Associate Director of Policy, and that portfolio includes education, and that's going to be important for today. But Brianna, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really happy to have you on, your first time on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Very happy to be here and excited for this conversation.
Today, we're going to talk about getting back to school, getting back to in-person instruction. This is a hot topic. We know there's been a lot in the news, and we've talked about this in recent episodes of the podcast. Every school system in Maryland is back for in-person instruction, and we know that the number one priority for our local school systems is ensuring the safety and the well-being of their students, families, teachers, staff, and really the entire school community. And of course, that's a big challenge amidst this pandemic, both inside and outside the classroom, and even outside of the school walls. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But to help us understand the pandemic's impact on our local school systems and how they're managing the return to in-person instruction, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Dan Curry to the podcast. Dr. Curry has been superintendent of Calvert County Public Schools since 2014, and in 2020 was named Maryland Superintendent of the Year. Very impressive. Dr. Curry, thank you so much for joining us today. We know you're very busy, but your expertise, I think, is going to be really beneficial for us and for our listeners.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
So, Kevin and Dr. Curry, there's no doubt that in-person instruction is critical for the cognitive, social, emotional, even the physical development of children. And I, for one, am very excited to see Maryland students back at all jurisdictions back to in-person. But there's obviously a need to balance that need to be in person, learning in person with their peers, with protecting the health of students, teachers, staff, which Kevin just mentioned. We also know that virtual learning presents other challenges, like difficulties accessing the right technology, even the right kind and speed of internet. There's also parents, of course, trying to juggle remote learning with their full-time jobs. There's a whole basket of things going on, right? So, Dr. Curry, if you could, we'd love if you could talk a bit about your process for getting back to in-person instruction and how you were able to navigate those challenges specifically in Calvert County.
Well, one of the things we had to do was first determine if and how many students would be interested in staying all virtual this coming year. In the spring, talking among superintendents from around Maryland, we all began to kind of conclude that maybe virtual learning might need to be on our menu in the future, not just pandemic years, but maybe other years, in order to attract those who have reasons to want to keep their children home. Maybe they would still enroll with us, they would be our students, and we would be providing the educational service. So each school district in Maryland devised some setup, what grade levels they might offer virtual. In Calvert County, we said grades 3 through 12 would be offered virtual instruction, but we wanted parents to sign up by the end of June for this present school year, and we wanted them to commit for the year. We didn't want them to say, okay, well, I feel safe now, 1st of October. It had to be something they were committed to and supportive of for the entire year. So once we had our enrollment for virtual academy, I'll call it, then we had knew how many students we had to prepare for who would be returning for 180 days of in-person instruction. And we did all the usual things that we had learned to do in the spring. The usual cleaning protocols. We had to add our air purifiers because we didn't use all of our classrooms in the spring hybrid setting. We knew that we were going to be inside of 6 feet because in the spring we were 6 feet social distance And this year, our target was, to every extent possible, 3 feet social distance. Difficult, especially when you have secondary schools and secondary sized bodies. But for the elementaries, we could set up classrooms with some pretty good spacing involved. We also advocated for vaccines. Our staff got vaccinated in the winter with the health department's help to start, and then our own school nurses started doing staff vaccinations all through the spring. And then we started offering vaccinations for high school and middle school kids as well, 12 and up, and we were able to get a good start on that.
So we know, vaccines, obviously, I think we can all agree, are the key for us all to move forward and finally escape the terrible nature of this pandemic. We need to get as many people vaccinated as we can. I'm interested in the virtual learning platform and the position that you and your colleagues were in coming into this school year and over the summer, because it certainly seemed like things were getting better, right? Last spring, into the summer, and then all of a sudden, the Delta variant takes hold. And that's right in the middle of when you and your colleagues need to sort of work out how this is going to work. I understand you need commitments because that's a big infrastructure to try and set up, and you need to know what exactly you need. So it makes a lot of sense to ask people to commit. What were there challenges that you faced being in the middle of the Delta variant spreading like fire? Asking parents to make that commitment. Was that something that was difficult for you?
Yeah, you got that right. It was. We set up our virtual. Okay, here it is, end of July, and we've got enough to make one class of third grade virtual and one class of fourth grade, 2 classes of fifth grade, and so on. Then some of those folks, the more they learned about how it was going to work, maybe not. But you're right. Within in August, starting maybe the second week of August, we started having folks panic, especially the parents of children in the elementary school for which vaccines weren't available. And please, 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 you need to open up more virtual opportunities. We just said, well, we'll put you on a waiting list. If we get a vacancy, we'll move you into the virtual class. But, we can't continue to operate with offering when you're scared, you can go out, and when you're feeling better, you can come in. You can't provide a consistent instruction with that happening all across your county with amongst your population. So we held firm and we said, no, we're going to do everything we can, everything we're supposed to do to keep safe. As we approached early August, I know I was playing with, okay, we're going to have to require masks for everyone elementary school, but maybe not middle and high, because those kids have had access to vaccines. And then, another ruling would come down, and other guidance. And eventually in early August, we were persuaded that we made the announcement that we would be requiring masks for everyone, vaccinated or not vaccinated, to start the school year for all grade levels when children are in the school building. We made that announcement before many did, and I'm glad we did. We got a little pushback, but in reality, it's turned out pretty good.
Most systems like you made that decision to require masks when in school buildings for not only the students, but the teachers and the staff. There were 1 or 2 holdouts, and as we know, the State Board of Education said, we think everyone should require masks. We're going to make everybody do that. That decision was confirmed by a General Assembly committee, and now every school system is requiring masks for anyone inside buildings. And it's important because we know that is a big component of protecting, especially kids who cannot be vaccinated against COVID-19. I'm sure you're also dealing with quarantine and testing, and like every school system is, and that's also a huge undertaking. How have kids generally been, particularly maybe elementary school kids, with the masks? I mean, I'm sure you've had some issues with some kids, but it's got to be a difficult position for you all to be in to determine what do you do if a kid just doesn't want to wear the mask, particularly maybe like a second grader.
The $1 million question.
Well, you'd be surprised. It's not that much of a problem. Probably a bigger problem for some of the adults than it is for the kids, because kids will follow the rules. Sure, if you're in first grade and you're sitting there all day long wearing your mask, you might start chewing on it after a while. Then it might slip down below your nose, but you're not doing it on purpose. And so, in general, I can say it hasn't been a problem. We know maybe some children with some sensory challenges and special programs who we might have to make some accommodations for. But for the most part, it really, my wife teaches first grade, never a problem. It just hasn't been an issue. I can tell you that, and certainly it's beneficial when it comes to the contact tracing and determining who's been quarantined. It's that much more effective in impacting fewer kids whenever you do have a positive test in your classroom and you identify who has been inside of 3 feet for more than 15 minutes of that positive test. And all of those decisions they've hit us much harder in September than they did in the spring when we were in hybrid. We did have a little bit of it, but now with everyone back, with more densely populated classrooms, more densely loaded school buses, it does impact more children. The middle school and high school students, if you were close to someone who tested positive and you're vaccinated, you don't have to quarantine. Keep hitting that and keep reminding parents who, when we call them and say, your child's going to have to quarantine, but some of your child's friends who were there also, they were vaccinated, so they're going to stay in school. So, this isn't over. So why don't you think about getting a vaccination?
Just another reason for someone to get their kid vaccinated when their child is eligible, no doubt about it. And a lot of what you were talking about, I think that's what Brianna was getting into, the need to balance all of these things. We know we're going to have more densely populated classrooms. We know that the risks are greater, but at the same time, we do know about the benefits of in-person learning, and particularly when it comes to the impact on kids emotionally, mentally, physically. It's a big deal. Yeah. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Dr. Larry Polsky at the Calvert County Health Department. We're big fans of his. He's a great friend of the podcast and for Mako. I'm sure you've been working hand in hand with them.
Absolutely. Dr. Polsky is a good friend of Calvert County Schools, and we communicate with him or his staff sometimes almost on a daily basis. And we've all kind of moved from last year, where we were really worried about the impact of the virus, to this year being perhaps leaning a little bit more worried to the impact of not being in school. And so rather than rush to the numbers are going up, let's go back to all virtual, we're more mindful that, yes, this could impact us, and we might have to close a couple of classrooms at times. And maybe at some point we might have to close a school. But if we have to close some classrooms, that doesn't mean we have to close the entire school. And if we have to close one school, it doesn't mean we have to close the entire county. So each move is calculated so that you disrupt learning to the least possible.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think we're doing the best we can, and we want to get it right. And I'm going to turn it over to Brianna here to talk more about some of the challenges outside of the schools. And we know there are many, but one that's getting a lot of attention now and really nationwide, challenges with transportation, getting kids to and from school. It's a big responsibility of our local school systems. And just nuts and bolts here, most school systems in Maryland use outside contractors to operate their school buses. Some directly hire their own drivers. But in both cases, we're seeing big challenges in finding enough certified drivers to accommodate students. And Brianna, I know you've been digging into this, and I know that we have the right person on here to give us the boots on the ground perspective.
Dr. Curry actually alluded to one of the first challenges with transporting kids during this strange time, and that's the fact that everyone's in tight corridors and the need to use masks and proper hand washing and all of that good stuff. But now now that we're mostly all back as a country into in-person learning, we've now moved into this new and maybe even larger challenge, which is these driver shortages. They're nothing new. I think that it's fair to say that it's a higher vacancy that we're looking at for licensed school bus drivers. That's linked to the pandemic, has been exacerbated by the pandemic. Would you agree with that, Dr. Curry?
Absolutely. Bus drivers, kitchen work, instructional assistants, and substitute teachers, all of those part-timers are kind of, there's a short supply right now.
Yeah, that makes sense that this is not an issue that is just linked to bus drivers, for example. But we definitely know that when school systems moved to a remote learning environment, many drivers either retired if they could, or they found higher paying work. Those folks aren't coming back to the profession, let's say. And then there's the other side of it, right? There are the people with a high risk of developing more serious symptoms from COVID, maybe driving a bus full of potentially unvaccinated kids, depending on the age group, might not be an option for them. So they likely aren't coming back to the profession either. I think what I'd really like to get to here is how do we move forward on the issue? We know that families in particular depend on county school systems to have reliable schedules, right? To have reliable start times, end times, and transportation is a major factor in that. Parents have to get to work on time. They need to know when their kids will be picked up safely. When will their kids return from school? I've anecdotally heard stories in school districts where kids are returning after 5 p.m. that normally get home at that 3 p.m. hour, but there's just such a shortage that they're getting home so much later. That's just one component of this really complex issue that we're facing. What else happens when you don't have enough drivers? What are y'all experiencing in Calvert?
Well, there's a combination of things. First of all, let me tell you that I'm kind of unique in that I'm a former certified school bus operator, driver. Now, it was a long time ago. It wasn't in the state of Maryland. I was a superintendent in the mountains of West Virginia back in the late 80s. And I decided, hey, I'll drive some field trips once in a while. And so I went through the training and the certification, and I can tell you I have a lot of respect for bus drivers because that first time I took kids on a Saturday field trip and I looked up in the mirror, I thought, oh my gosh, the responsibility I have today is different than any responsibility I've ever had before. Bus driving is also very unique in that it's just part-time work for the most part. It's about 5 hours a day, and you start in the dark. When the time changes in particular, you start and work about 2.5 hours in the morning, and you have to get to your bus before the sun comes up. And then you've got about 8 hours in the midday to kill. And then you got to come back out and maybe finish up and park your bus after dark. And it's still just part-time work. So it's always appealed to uniquely to folks who were self-employed, those working in agriculture, those who had their own businesses, gave them some guaranteed income. But these days, I don't know that the answer is paying more. We had 150 buses, typically, is what we normally plan for. And just within 2-3 weeks before the first day of school, our contractors let us know they were short about 16 drivers.
Wow.
So our transportation department and our schedulers and routers had to hustle up, and where they filled what they could with sub-drivers, because sub-drivers were hardly available. Maybe other jobs have come up that folks choose to do full-time. You could be right. Many were retirees, and perhaps they just decided they don't need the risk. Maybe some don't feel like wearing a mask all the time when they work, and that was going to be a requirement. So there's a lot of different reasons why they might have stepped down, but we found ourselves short. We found ourselves redeveloping routes. And it's interesting, with all of that, we don't have any walkable schools in Calvert County. We have Beach Elementary has a few folks who can walk to school, but for the most part, all of our schools are not located in a neighborhood where kids walk to school. So basically plan to transport all 15,000 of our kids. But at the moment, we only have about 8,000 or 9,000 riding the bus. That means we have probably at least double, if not triple, the number of parents who are driving their kids to school.
That's huge.
That creates a traffic jam.
Yep.
Sure.
We've got terrible traffic jams at a lot of our schools with cars backed out of the parking lot, out of the driveway to the school, backed up the highway, getting in the way of the buses. And if your drop-off for parents isn't well designed and separate from your bus drop-off and your bus loading and unloading area, you've got a mess there too. So that's the kind of thing that can impact your timing. We have 4 layers of bus start times, 4 levels, and have ending times at the end of the day. And if you're on the first level, fine, you're going to be on schedule. But if you're second or third, there can be things get in your way so that the bus is late getting to school to pick you up at the end of the day, and therefore late getting you home.
Right. A lot of challenges there, no doubt about it. And I appreciate what you said. And I love your hands-on approach. That's right up my alley. As a superintendent saying, I'm going to go through the certification, I'm going to drive some field trips. And I mean, you've been in the seat. I have not, but I think we all take for granted the work that our bus drivers do. I mean, not only are they CDL drivers, right? So they have to go through all of that training and testing, but they're also acting as referees, as counselors, keeping these kids safe on the road. Like you said, when you looked up in the mirror, I think we all can picture that in our head. We've all been on a school bus, and you get that wide view of all these kids probably jumping around and screaming at each other, kid stuff, right? And you got to be able to handle all of that on top of making sure that they're safe on the road, dealing with idiotic drivers, and now, like you said, maybe wearing a mask. So again, this is not just an issue in Calvert County. It's not just an issue in Maryland. It's a nationwide issue, and we've started to see states take some drastic steps to curb this shortage. I mean, Massachusetts activated its National Guard to drive kids to and from school. We know that several school systems, and hopefully they have adequate infrastructure in place for pickup and drop off so that they're not having all these traffic jams, because they're actually offering families stipends to pay for alternative transportation or to drive kids to school themselves. And the governor here in Maryland has directed MDOT and MVA to expedite the application process, to streamline getting folks trained and on the job. I mean, from your perspective, and I know it was a while ago when you went through the training, but from what I understand, it takes folks a couple months to get certified, trained, and actually on the road. So how much of a problem do you think that is now when you find out, okay, well, we have a pool of people we can recruit, but it's going to take them a few months to get on the road. And so during that time, we're still going to have to deal with all these challenges. I mean, that's got to be something that you all are having to deal with and think about as well.
That's right. It does take some time. It is great. I love to give the analogy. A classroom teacher has challenges sometimes keeping discipline in the classroom when they're looking at the children. A bus driver has often more children on his bus than a regular classroom teacher, and must keep discipline only by looking in the mirror, and only occasionally. So, and we have to say, often our school bus driver is the face of the school district to the families, the first thing in the morning. When they pull up and those kids are to stop, often with their parents, the way they greet, the way they say hello, the way they present that they like being with kids and they like their job, it's kind of it's the first face of the school district, even when they are contractors. They're amazing and they're dedicated and they really seem to like their job, but it can be different. Yeah, there's 8 hours of classroom instruction for just to start. If you've already got a CDL license, there still has to be some classroom instruction. There has to be time behind the wheel of practicing. You've got to memorize the whole process for pre-trip inspection that you have to invest in every day. And so it is something that can't be hurried. We appreciate the governor's effort to dedicate some special times. This Saturday, in fact, at all of the center, at the MVA centers, I think they're going to have special opportunities for drivers to get tested. Unfortunately, we started a new class the first week of school after we had volunteers come forward and say, oh, well, I'll drive bus. We had a class of 13, but they're not ready yet. So we hope the governor will set up another opportunity maybe in the month of October to get everyone tested and ready.
A massive challenge. And I think Brianna was right to say that, this is shaping up, as soon as we think that, you've checked all the boxes, you've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's, you're doing everything you can to get people back safely. And then you got a bunch of drivers calling out or not showing up. And so that just has to be, it seems like, and look, we can relate. It seems like as soon as you do one thing, you get knocked down again. And particularly, I think we should really call out and appreciate the school systems for, the pivots that you all have made throughout this pandemic. We can also appreciate changing guidance, right? We know that that's been a thing. throughout this pandemic, just sort of everybody being on the same page. And one other thing I know that you've had to deal with, and the General Assembly has weighed in on, and counties certainly play a role as well, is your enrollment counts, because the funding that you receive is based on student enrollment. And when you went to virtual learning, you knew that a lot of parents probably took their kids and put them into private schools because they didn't want to do virtual, and maybe they don't re-enroll those kids in public schools. But we use those enrollment counts to distribute funding. And when you take a hit like you did in the pandemic, we all had to make sure that we weren't using those lower than normal numbers, which weren't real. And we knew that there'd be some bounce back. So you had to make sure that you weren't basing funding now on numbers that weren't real, that were going to bounce back. How much of a challenge was it for you all to sort of make that case?
That's right. And, we can't say enough about our General Assembly and how well they listened. They were well connected with the school districts. Virtually every school district lost significant enrollment in what would be your normal fall count. That is your official number for which you're funded in the state formula, and for which you calculate your local maintenance of effort as well. And they took a very clear stand that we would be held harmless. For Calvert County, a little bit more lost. We lost more to private schools, but there weren't that many seats for private schools. So our biggest loss was probably to homeschooling, because parents just couldn't make the schedule that we were doing with virtual school because of their work schedule. Their children might need to be in daycare or with grandma or grandpa, who might not want to manage and help the child with the virtual schooling at home. So many of them opted, okay, we'll take care of this when we get home from work, and we'll do it our own way. So we've got some of, in Calvert County, we've got some of our homeschoolers back. Our numbers are back up a little bit. Still, we are in that environment where we have folks coming and going. Oh, you're going to require masks? I'm going to homeschool. Oh, you're not going to have virtual for me? I'm going to homeschool, I guess. So there are still those looking for more options, or looking for some rules that match their personal code of how things should be. So you're right. We have learned to adapt on the fly, and if there's anything that is going to be consistent in this world, it is that it's going to change tomorrow.
Makes a lot of sense, Dr. Curry. And I think one thing that we've kind of left out of this conversation, we've talked a lot about families, about students, about the administration itself. What about the teachers? How are your teachers doing? Have they been excited to swing back into in-person learning for the most part? Have you had any unexpected hiccups or anything? I imagine that it's another adjustment for them as well.
Yeah, our teachers are great. I have 2 advisory committees that I meet with. One, all elementary teachers, identify the teachers of the year from every school, and they become my current elementary teacher advisory committee, and the same middle and high school teachers of the year from those schools. They become a secondary teacher advisory committee. I meet with them once a month, and I've met with both in recent weeks, and I ask them, what are you finding in the children with regard to academics and emotional stability? Virtually all of them report, we are so excited to be back, and our kids are so excited to be back. They're just happy to have time with their friends. They're happy to be with other people. We are so glad to have a room full of kids, and everything has been very positive. At the elementary level, I think they're seeing a little bit more of the impact of what we might call learning loss. Mm-hmm. And they're identifying that. And, we're doing some level testing to just see where everybody is at this point. And then we'll make our plan for instruction to fill those gaps that these children might have as a result of the year they had last year. So our teachers are really invested in that. I can tell you, though, right now they are starting to, first of all, both students and staff had to identify that they didn't really have the stamina for a full day. Whenever you've been home on a last spring, anyway, if you were teaching hybrid and you had half of the children at a time and half of the children at home, and that staying close to the computer all the time calls for a different kind of energy level and physical involvement than
Absolutely.
when all of your students are in front of you and you're back to moving all around the classroom, you're back to reaching and pointing and doing other things. So stamina is important to develop for both students and staff. And now that we have positive tests and we have quarantining, now more teachers are experiencing that they have some responsibility to continue to provide for those children who are quarantined. And so they are back to turning on their cameras and sending the kids a Teams invite. We're not fully what we call concurrent teaching, but we are asking all teachers to engage and involve those students who, by no fault of their own, have been told they have to stay home. We've also included those students whose parents have done the right thing and said, well, my kid has 2 symptoms. I don't know what he's got, but he's got 2 symptoms. You've told me I should keep them home. We said, yes, we want you to keep them home until you get tested. And until that time, you too can tune in remotely for your class. So we can do that for 3rd grade and up. For our little ones, we're providing other opportunities for them to learn as well when they have to quarantine. But that's a new burden. And
yeah, another pivot point too. And certainly, that has to be a lot of moving parts there and people trying to do the right thing, keeping their kids home. I think we're all in that same boat now. If somebody gets a cold, you immediately think, oh my goodness, this could be COVID and I better contact everybody that I've been in contact with, or I better call my work and tell them, right? So I want to do the right thing, but I also want my kid to learn. And so it's really great to hear that you've been able to do that. We could talk with you for hours and hours and hours. One more thing I did want to get your input on, because this is something that local governments are certainly dealing with as well and very aware of, and that is the uptick in cyber crimes. And these criminals now are targeting school districts and they're targeting local governments with these ransomware attacks and demanding money, oftentimes in shady payments like Bitcoin, where they can remain anonymous. But they've realized that there's money to be made because school systems, local governments cannot afford to have their documents held up by these criminals. They can't afford to have their websites, particularly when you're talking about virtual learning. They can't afford to have those websites taken down. So it's become a lucrative business and it's a problem. I'm sure you're dealing with those challenges, and I'm sure you've had to ramp up your efforts with IT and cybersecurity, particularly when you have so many devices that are outside of the building and far more vulnerable to attack. And, we know that cybersecurity is only as good as the user behind the device. So what kind of challenges have you seen and how have you sort of dealt with this and ramped up to make sure that, you have the proper protocols in place so that you're not a victim to these criminals?
It's pretty scary. What can happen so far, knock on wood, it's not been a problem for us. We just did in the last 2 years employ full-time staff whose only responsibility was network security. And we are continuing to invest in protective apps and supports that will add to our security. You're right, it is internally within our own network. We have to make sure we've got all that locked down and all the proper precautions. When a child takes a school laptop home, it's a whole different thing there. We don't control the router in the home, and that is there's potential for other things happening to one of our school computers whenever it goes outside of our network. So all the more reason to be vigilant in this day and age. And I guess it will probably always be developing. You'll feel good if you can just stay one step ahead of the criminals.
Amen to that. And, again, this is just one more challenge that has been exacerbated by the pandemic, one more thing that you're having to deal with on your already very full plate. Dr. Curry, again, this could be a 5-hour conversation. We know that you're busy. I really want to thank you for joining us today and the expertise that that you have on the ground level is something that I think, again, benefits our listeners, and sort of just connecting the dots and realizing that there are real people making these really tough decisions, and real people on the ground who care very much about your children's education and making sure that they're safe and making sure that everybody has a seat at the table to express the things that they need to express, but hopefully they do it in a civil manner. Unfortunately, you've dealt with it. Everybody's dealt with it. Anyone who's front facing in government or school systems, these attacks, these personal attacks, these threats, that people are just really upset. So
including
again,
the bus drivers,
those
those family
absolutely.
liaisons, right?
Right.
That's right. Is there anything that we haven't gotten to that you want to make sure people understand? Any closing thoughts before we let you go?
Well, first of all, just thanks for having me. And on behalf of the superintendents of Maryland, I thank you for recognizing that we are humans. Sometimes it is the job is challenging and rewarding, and there's not a one of us, no matter how many years we've done this, have ever expected to have to face the kinds of challenges we faced in the last 18 months. We run into a lot of good folks who are sympathetic to the decisions we have to make, who recognize the hard work, who recognize there's not one right answer, who recognize that often it seems one decision, you win some fans, but you also lose others with just every decision you make. So we all try not to take it personally and recognize it is the nature of the job and because of the seat we sit in. And we can't do it without good support of both our boards of education and our local county commissioners. So it's a team effort, and we'll get through this together.
This was super exciting. I greatly appreciated your perspective, and who knew that we were going to have a former bus driver as well to chat with. That was such a great twist. Again, thank you for all of your work, and I look forward to seeing what you and Calvert continue to do for the students and families.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll go ahead and leave it there. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all of these episodes will be sent directly to the device of your choice. You can also follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, the Conduit Street blog. For Brianna January and for Dr. Dan Curry, this is Kevin Canale signing off, and we will talk to you soon.